Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about New Mutants. Even though this movie's production history, and as many times as it was delayed, which was a lot, is the primary focus for people and interest for people, or for me growing up, New Mutants was a really big comic. Just, I guess personally to me, I made a video essay about it, Shadow of the Demon Bear, if you'd like to hear more specifics, and specifically the story that this movie is actually based on. So it was a bit of a, nostalgic dream to even hear about this movie being made, because I never thought they would make a movie about the New Mutants. It wasn't really popular in the 90s. It sort of become a bigger comic story over time because of critical acclaim and so forth, but it's surprising that Josh Boone would decide to make this story into a New Mutants movie. I do really like the New Mutants, and maybe because of nostalgic qualities, and he did pick team members that I really like in the era of New Mutants, drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz, when these were all written by Chris Claremont after it was created by him and Bob McLeod. You'd think I would just be into this because I'm just so happy there's a New Mutants movie, and I'm not. This is not a good movie. This is a bad movie, and it is a really bad adaptation. It's the kind of adaptation that you would get sort of like when they made Generation X into a TV movie, although I think that one was actually a better adaptation than this, so this might actually be worse than a TV movie pilot that aired on Fox once and spent, I didn't look it up, but I'm gonna guess a significantly less amount of money making than they did with this pile of crap. Now, the thing with Josh Boone is he took a story that is mainly known for a couple of things. And there's a bunch of stuff wrong with this, and it's like the typical thing with X-Men movie adaptations. The problem with doing the Demon Bear right off the bat is it's much like doing the Dark Phoenix saga. You don't do that in a movie. It's a stupid idea, because these are stories that have built on continuity, and then you get there and then it represents a certain thing because you've been hearing about it for like months, if not years, or something like that. It's been building through the characters. You understand those relationships. Like Dark Phoenix saga at least should be done in a trilogy, not in like sort of referenced in one movie and then we're just gonna like do it all up in another. That's just a bad, awful idea. You're not really giving it the due respect and like really fleshing out a story that was really important to that property. Demon Bear is completely similar in that you hear about the Demon Bear referenced and mentioned in constant adventures and storylines with Danny Moonstar until you get to, issue 18, 19, so forth, whatever. I forget the exact issue numbers. But when you get there, it means something because she has to face the Demon Bear because you know that it killed her parents, it represents all this stuff, all these things. And they just don't do that because they decide to do this whole different thing on Danny Moonstar. Now, I am going to spoil this movie because I don't like it and I don't care, but also because it's hard for me to go into my issues with it. So if you really don't want this terrible New Mutants movie spoiled for you, then stop watching stuff. The thing with Danny Moonstar in this is that her powers in the comics is that she can basically make a psychic projection of someone's deepest fear, but it doesn't. In the comics, it's never presented to look that super realistic. It's supposed to be a little projection and you get outlines of people and stuff like that. I don't know how it would look in a movie, but it wouldn't look like, you would be able to tell it wasn't reality. You'd be so, horrified or embarrassed or whatever that someone is projecting your greatest fear. That would sort of be enough, which, it would. That would be crazy. You would be like, oh my God, everyone's seeing this and I'm scared and I'm reliving. It'd be this powerful bunch of emotions because obviously that's what would be happening if she were to do that, and she didn't have much control over that. That is true. But in this movie, when she is brought into this facility where she just wakes up after she's been attacked by a demon bear thing, which that's a whole stupid thing, is that she actually sort of can't control who it attaches itself to. It can happen while she's sleeping, and they get actually feel like they're living in these memories. So it's sort of a Nightmare on Elm Street thing, but not as interesting or as innovative or as dynamic cinematography wise, which that's a whole problem with this movie too. And they're kind of haunted by her nightmares and her fears, and the Demon Bear is one of those fears, not an actual character or villain that she has to fight. It's a sort of made up Demon Bear that she made up for some reason, and because her dad told her a bedtime story about a demon bear, it through her teen years she still believes in basically this boogeyman type character, but because she's a very powerful mutant, she can make a demon bear appear. So that's really stupid. It adapts New Mutants in a way that is not what New Mutants is. New Mutants is a kid's book. I mean, it is. I was into it when I was a little kid because that's who it is written for. It's like young adult kind of stuff. And although Josh Boone did that with Fault in Our Stars, which I didn't see, and now I probably won't definitely after this, but he wants to age this up and make this more of a horror thing, and apparently really likes Bill Sienkiewicz, which I think the way he shot this, you can tell he does not. Bill Sienkiewicz was surreal and expressionistic and odd, and you never knew what to expect on each frame. And this is shot in a very competent, very boring Hollywood way. It's one of the most boringly shot. Like, superhero movies are not known, specifically the Marvel ones, for their great cinematography, other than like sort of like competent stuff. It doesn't really blow you away in any degree. There's like certain shots that are really great, but like overall, like the whole theory of cinematography is just like, what if it looked like all well lit and they have colorful suits and stuff? Isn't that interesting? Now, this was shot by Peter Deming, who shot Mulholland Drive and the latest season of Twin Peaks, and is, by all accounts, actually, if you look at his filmography, it's really interesting. He shot like Austin Powers and Goldmember and Mulholland Drive. Like, I'm sort of fascinated by this guy. I'd love to hear an interview with him, but he does not do a great job with this, and I think it's because Josh Boone is not the great, interesting, bizarre, surreal filmmaker to really show Bill Sienkiewicz's art. Apparently, he's a big fan. I couldn't tell that from his directing approach at all, and it feels like he sort of just liked how cool that comic was, which it is, but he didn't like, what it was saying, what that art really represents and means. He wasn't trying to do that. He was just sort of trying to make this like Nightmare on Elm Street rip-off kind of thing, and Danny Moonstar, I guess, is Freddy Krueger. Not really. Even that, like, Danny Moonstar as a character really meant a lot to me growing up, and they managed to really mess up a character that's really interesting. She has a lot of dimensions to her. She can be angry, she can be rebellious, she's very off-kilter, kind of, she's very much a kid. Like, you never know what you expect from her. Also, she has this whole bow and arrow thing, which this movie just ignores completely, which was disappointing. It leaves a lot out that would make this film different. It's like, that's the thing. It's like, it's almost like Josh Boone tried as much as he could to make all the interesting things about New Mutants and take them out and make this like what a normal superhero film should be, but in like 2006. Like, I don't know if he was going for a period piece or he's just a really bad director. Spoilers, he's a bad director. There were some interesting choices. I actually like the Danny Moonstar and Rain Sinclair actually have a full-on relationship, which I was a little like, I know they have a mind meld in the comics, so it's like sort of not the most out of left field thing ever. When they start kissing, I was a little like, I can see it. I can see Rain Sinclair and Danny Moonstar. That didn't upset me, and it is a change unless it's happened in the more recent comics, but it's like they had such a close relationship. I was like, I get it. I get it. I mean, the New Mutants were always sort of liking each other because they're teenagers and things like that, but that's something they didn't do in the 80s when these comics came out. I actually thought that was appropriate, but I am very pro that. If they want to bring back the comics and do that, I think that's actually a cool idea. I feel like personality-wise they work well together, so I don't really ship people, but if I were, I'm cool with that one, I guess. I don't know. I think it helped that relationship kind of show how close they were because you don't have as much time. I thought that was actually a good choice. And certain things, like Ileana, they definitely aged up Ileana. I wish she'd been more like a kid and less like Anna Taylor-Joy is a great actress, and she was really great as Ileana Rasputin and playing magic. And she played off of like how cool magic is. They don't really like get into the whole limbo thing and how she has magic powers, and they made the portal stuff like a normal mutant portal thing and not like the circle and she jumps into it. I thought that would have been cooler, but whatever. And they do certain things that are like the comic, like I like how they did her soul sword and things like that. I thought were actually pretty cool with her, and also Maisie Williams was really great as Rain Sinclair, like almost pitch perfect. Like her and Anna Taylor-Joy, I thought were like, I was like, oh, that's like exactly what those characters are, at least in their portrayals. But I didn't like the Charlie Heaton had this awful southern accent. It sort of got close to what Cannonball is, but they didn't have as much fun with it. Same with, I guess it's Henry Zega as Sunspot. Like, I mean, in addition, like, they, not to get into the colorism too much, but they basically, like, Roberto da Costa has a much darker complexion in the comic, as well as Danny Moonstar, as well as that the original comic had, also had Karma, who's Vietnamese. Like, it was much more diverse, and they seem to have found a way. Even though I like this team up, I wish they had at least, I don't know, I like the guy playing Sunspot for the most part, but he's more Brazilian in the comic than this. It felt like they Hollywood this up in the stupidest way possible. And apparently those were all Josh Boone's choices, including like in their rec room, they're watching tons of Buffy, which is like, I get you like Buffy a lot. And then it was all the Buffy episodes everyone knows, which was like, oh, this is super boring. Yeah, I guess they were hinting at stuff later in the movie because they had Willow and Tara kissing, and then they had the Hush villains, and they had those weird guys with masks, which is supposed to reference something with Ileana, which I'd never heard of that. That's something he made up, which doesn't really work very well. And the whole thing with the facility and this doctor, and it's like, well, what's this doctor even like? Like, what's the point of that? Like, I get he was doing the Essex thing, which is referencing Mr. Sinister, which was referenced at the end of X-Men Apocalypse all those years ago, and like, what was the purpose of that whole thing? Like, it's not like Mr. Sinister was going to show up. It's not like Mr. Sinister had that much to do with this era of New Mutants. Like, what were you trying to say with this? Where is this going? It didn't seem like you had any sort of clue, which is the problem with like the whole Fox X-Men run. Really is like, they would just reference things and be like, aren't you fans happy? And I'm like, well, what are you saying with this? I'm like, but we said Magneto. Aren't you happy? This Magneto is there. He's over there. You're not happy? Oh. They would reference things, but they didn't know how to be like competent storytellers. And that's the real thing with this, is like Josh Boone, it felt like he really wanted this to be an important kind of different teen horror superhero movie. And it's like he has a lot of things going on, and I don't think New Mutants couldn't do that. But this isn't the way to introduce these characters. These characters work better if you just introduce them and then you do these interesting things with them. And it felt like, even when I've read his plans for these future films, which are definitely not happening, it seemed like he was more interested in adapting them into his own bullshit than actually making New Mutants movies. And that doesn't really work with comic book movies unless you're like Tim Burton and it's those first two Batman movies. Like, it really doesn't work. And I don't know why all these filmmakers try to do that, because it's such a stupid idea. Most of them either come halfway or understand they're adapting something that has this rich history, and you have to adapt it effectively to make into a movie, not put your own crap first, which he definitely did. The origins of the New Mutants are actually really interesting. Like, they can't control their powers, they're upset by certain things. Like, Danny Moonstar's powers being so crazy in this was just completely absurd, because why would they hang out with her? Like, they would probably, after the conclusion of this movie, like, definitely stay away from her forever, because she's going to just, fall asleep and unlock their greatest fear again and again and again. That sounds like a horrible existence to be around her, and I just don't understand like what they were thinking with that one. Like, the whole facility thing, like, it's supposed to be Mr. Sinister's thing, but like, does that lead anywhere? I guess because they were going to do an Inferno movie at the end of this, and that would have led to this thing and this conclusion, which ultimately sounds really dumb. I do not understand the purpose of this. There are certain things with the Demon Bear at the end that references the story, but the Demon Bear being in a different like pocket dimension, and the kind of strangeness with the Demon Bear, and the idea that you don't fully understand what's going on, and it feels weird and surreal. I never got that with this movie. It felt like the surrealism was more because Josh Boone just didn't have an answer for it, and less because they were doing interesting imagery that made my imagination light up. It just made me go, oh cool, they're spooky guys with mouths. It's like, you made Slender Man with a happy face. Why would that be interesting at all? Like, it felt like in this very competent, boring kind of Hollywood way. I just didn't find that exciting whatsoever. Like, it just felt so boring after a while. The more I watched it, the less exciting it would be. I do think the finale like hinted at certain things, and maybe that got a little more exciting, but its ultimate conclusion about Danny Moonstar and like her just like, if I calm down, the Demon Bear will just go away, was like, no, that's not. The conclusion of the Demon Bear had nothing to do with Danny Moonstar. Like, they had to kill the Demon Bear, and which would release her. Like, she didn't kill the Demon Bear. She failed at killing the Demon Bear, even though she tried, and it says a lot about her team and them. And even though Magic used her sword, that didn't work, and it's just like, ugh. And then like, what was the point of the doctor? Like, they kill her and she can do these forceful things, but like, what is the ultimate goal of this? Like, does this represent anything? Like, it just doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot. And they like reference Logan with this other facility that possibly the kids are going to go to. The New Mutants is a kid book about kids who can't control their powers, and they get into these crazy situations, and the scary thing is they could ultimately destroy themselves or hurt their teammates, and they start to care about them, and how scary that is, that they're put into situations they really shouldn't be, and tested, and all those things. And like, this hints at the whole idea of that they're brought together when Professor X was a brood and ultimately just wanted to like harvest them for eggs and eat them and stuff. Sure, I got what you were referencing almost every time, but it felt to me like I'm watching New Mutants in 1996 or 2006, or a time when Hollywood would be less respectful to comic book properties, and we just sort of had to put up with it and be happy I saw my characters on the big screen. But I don't have to do that anymore. We're past that era, and Josh Boone isn't interesting enough to really say something with that kind of an adaptation. It just felt like he had his own dumb bullcrap, and he should have made a different movie. If you're going to have a kid like that and have these things, that would be fine, but like, why is that Danny Moonstar? You have no real reason for it other than to amp up her powers and to like, I guess, say these things about like being calm and how your anger can destroy you and things like that. But that's not what the Demon Bear is. That's not what this story is trying to do. You've changed it in such a way. I get that like a lot of screenwriters and people who make movies in Hollywood change stories, and sometimes that works out for the better, but I would say this doesn't, because as a movie as itself, it's confused. It doesn't really know what it's doing. I don't care if there are reshoots and whatever was going on with Fox, just that doesn't work. But as a New Mutants adaptation and as an adaptation of the Demon Bear, I really just find it offensive, because it just like doesn't capture what it's trying to do. It doesn't capture what it's saying about all these kids. It doesn't show their differences in terms of culture and being able to come together, which the comic really absolutely did, especially in those days. You just end up with this really like boring white bread Hollywood movie from a guy who didn't really understand what any of that represented and was entirely disrespectful from the whole idea of bringing these different kids together and their struggles in terms of culture and all those things to understand each other and stuff like that. Like, it just, I'm not expecting you to exactly perfectly adapt Claremont or Sienkiewicz, but from watching this, it felt like you were assigned this and you're a horror director and were forced into it, and this was like his passion project. And if this is his passion project, I just don't think he's that good of a director. I'm sort of just writing him off, because I think of this as a pretty epic failure in terms of, I've been lucky in terms of my generation of most of what I've been nostalgic for has gotten rebooted and given a lot of money and all these things. This has to be the worst adaptation I've ever seen of anything that was important to me in my childhood. It just like, it like so does not care about what made it special. It more cares about making Nightmare on Elm Street. Make a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But even if this was one of those, it'd probably be one of the worst ones. I know he probably thinks this is like Dream Warriors or something. This is not Dream Warriors. This is like whatever the worst one was, this is below that, because he couldn't even do an interesting Freddy sequence. Like, he is just so uptight and boring in his own like stupid versions of what a dream is. Why is it whenever we do a horror dream sequence, it looks exactly just like real life? Like, make it like, the Freddy stuff was interesting because that looks horrifying if you're in these cartoony worlds. Like, when you do it this way, it never looks scary. I'm always just like, oh, of course, because you can't do the interesting Freddy stuff. You have to, that I never knew it was going to come around the corner, that I never, if they were going to suddenly be like crushed, or like what feels like a fun dream would become a scary dream, and things like that. How they first get their powers are so horrifying. Like, it says so much about puberty and like growing up and all these things, and you just like, you throw all that out the window to like get this stupid narrative. It's just an awful way to adapt a really good comic that I think had a lot more to say than this movie would ever have. All this movie has to say is how not to adapt something, and how not to adapt a comic I really love. Yeah, Josh Boone is like below competent, who was clearly helped out by a lot more talented people who could not save this pile of crap, because he really didn't know what he was doing with this kind of an adaptation. I think he just went, oh, it's like a high school thing, whatever. And that's sort of what we got. He seems like a very basic person who thinks he's very deep. And that's what this movie is. It's a very basic adaptation that just took a few things that looked like they skimmed it and thought the art was really cool, and then they made it into a fairly competent whatever superhero movie. If that's how you're going to present yourself, don't expect me to care, because this is not a New Mutants film that I will ever really care that much about. I think it's best to just walk away from this and do much like Disney did and just release this during a pandemic and hope no no one really talks about it again. And I know I'm really late to review this, and I can tell no one is really talking about it other than like, hey, I saw it. And I guess that's what this review is. You just kind of leave and go, hey, I saw it. And that's all there really needs to be said. I hope that this doesn't come up when people search New Mutants on Google eventually, because no one will have any reason to look into it other than to make jokes about the release date, because when you really get down to what this kind of movie is, as a New Mutants fan, I think this is probably the most let down I've ever been, because I don't think Josh Boone should have ever made this kind of movie, because he frankly wasn't capable, and that screams throughout the entire movie how incapable of a director he is. I don't really see any sort of vision or auteur statement through the emptiness that you could really see through his kind of an adaptation. It felt like he just grasped at basic emotional beats to sort of make something of this and try to act like he could ever be Bill Sienkiewicz, when frankly he could never be as interesting or as creative as anyone who made the original New Mutants, and probably not most of the people who even read it. I think he's more like the guy who said, hey, that looks cool in the corner, and acts like he's really deep because, you know, he has more opportunities than most people. Really, he's just a privileged kind of piece of shit director who I'd much rather stay away from my favorite property and have nothing to do with it, because he ultimately, this is one of the great failures of Marvel adaptations I have ever seen, because it's more about a director flexing his, you know, big auteur statement. And when your big auteur statement is this stupid, I don't think you're much of an auteur. So if you have seen New Mutants and would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.